Hey there, beautiful people. This is your girl, Coach Charity, coming to you from Inspired Kingdom Coaching. And so I just wanted to come on here as promised and talk about my testimony of how God brought my husband and I together. I know it has been a long time since I have been on here, and the last video I uploaded was check-in, I got married. So in December of 2021, God fulfilled his word in my life, and I was married to the man of my dreams. And literally, I say the man of my dreams. God literally did exceedingly abundantly above what I asked or could even imagine. And so I want to give my full testimony as promised. And it is literally my prayer that through my testimony, that you will believe that God is who he says that he is, that he literally is God, and that he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. So that is my prayer. My prayer is that you will believe God, and that is my goal for sharing my testimony. Now, for those who do not know, again, I got married in December of 2021. I was 37 years old, and I was a single mother of two wonderful boys. And I had been a single mother for 15 years before I got married. So, it took me a little while to get on here and post this video. I had intended to right after I got married, but things happened very quickly. As the word said, as the word God spoke to me in my life personally, it accelerated the way he said that it would. And a lot of things happened, and I'll share that in my testimony. But also, shortly after my husband and I got married, 5 months into being married, we found out that we were expecting. And so this is 2023 that I'm recording this video. So in January of 2023, I gave birth to twin baby girls. So my husband and I have 4-month-old twin baby girls. So with all that being said, let me get into my testimony. And again, I pray that it encourages someone for you to believe God, to believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. So just a little background about me. I grew up in church my entire life. My father is a pastor. My mom, heavily active in the church, choir director. And so I've literally grown up in the church my entire life. However, that doesn't mean that I had a relationship with God or that I knew God for myself. I literally went to church because my parents made me, and we were in church from Sunday to Sunday. And when I say that, I'm not saying that lightly. We literally were in church from Sunday to Sunday. And so I had a very wonderful upbringing. I have very loving parents. I'm the oldest of 6. We have a big family. And even to this day, we have a very loving relationship, and we just love to get together and have a great time. So I was very secure in my family, knowing that I was loved by my family. But in my household, I didn't receive a lot of, affirmation or validation. I didn't hear words like, you were beautiful or you were capable, and not that there was anything wrong with that. My parents did the best that they could. I'm just giving you some background knowledge. So, for me, I started having issues with self-worth and my self-esteem when I entered school. Noticing that I didn't look like the other girls, and then standards of beauty in our society, according to standards of beauty, I didn't fit the standards of beauty. So very early on, I really started having issues with my self-esteem. I had low self-worth. I didn't like my hair. I didn't like my face. I noticed that the girls who had boys trying to talk to them didn't look like me. And so very early on, the enemy used that as a seed, to kind of start this path that I would go down, as I got into my latter years. So I suffered from very low self-worth and low self-esteem because I just didn't believe that I was beautiful. The qualities that I had that I didn't know were God-given, I diminished. I always felt that someone else was better than me. God had given me the gift of singing. I can sing, play the piano, all sorts of, but I diminished myself. I dimmed myself, and I always believed, I'm not, good enough. I'm not that great. I can't sing that well. And so that's what started me down the enemy's path for my life. And so I was looking for validation. I wanted to know that I was beautiful because I didn't know it for myself. And so I was always looking for someone to tell me that I was great, that I was good enough, that I was beautiful, that I was worthy. And so I began seeking that in boys and a man, and I was always taught in church, fornication is wrong. I was just taught it's wrong, don't do it. But I really didn't have the knowledge behind, why it was wrong, having the spiritual understanding to know what it opens you up to. I didn't know that. I was just always taught in church it's wrong, just don't do it. And so I just went through, my adolescent years, just really suffering from low self-esteem. And so I was always very outgoing, very, smiling all the time. And I would try to overachieve because like if I do the greatest, if I do my best, then that means I am the best. So it was always external things. So when I was 19 years old, still in church, still going through the church because I was made to go to church, but I didn't know God for myself. And so when I was 19 years old, I met a guy. We met in church, and so I want us to be careful, because we meet guys in church. But I met him in church, and I was 19 years old. I didn't really know him, and he was the first guy that really, gave me attention, that really took notice to me. And so I was smitten. And everything he told me, oh, you're beautiful, you're gorgeous, I want to be with you. Not knowing that his motive was simply because I was a virgin. He wanted to sleep with me because he had never slept with a virgin. That came out later, so we'll talk about that. So he began pursuing me, and I simply, I wanted that attention. I was seeking that attention. And so every word that he said, I hung on to. And so I gave myself to him. And literally, when I say that rocked my world upside down, it did. Because very shortly after, I had given myself to him, then he made it clear that, oh, we're moving too fast. This is not really what I thought I wanted. And he went on to get engaged to someone else. And I was devastated, 19 years old, devastated. And I remember just all the emotions because, sex is very spiritual. And so I remember going through all the emotions and just not really understanding, really what I had done. I didn't have the full understanding. And so it started just a catalyst, really of going through relationship after relationship, seeking love. And so, I got in and out of relationships, seeking to be validated, seeking to be affirmed, just wanting someone just love me, tell me who I am, not realizing that comes from God. So by the time I was 21, I had left home and I had moved out of state against my parents' wishes. And parents always have discernment. I was moving out of state to go to college and finish school. My parents didn't want me to, and there was a guy I had known since I was a kid, so I'm thinking, oh, I know him. He had moved there too, and I'm like, okay, I'll know somebody moving to Texas. I'm from Kansas. I moved from Kansas to Texas, and so moved down there. Was supposed to be going to school. First generation in my immediate family to go to college, so I'm excited. I'm going to go off and finish school and come back and be successful. And I went down there and got in a relationship with this guy who I thought I knew since we were kids. And I ended up pregnant, 21 years old, away from home. And I remember, calling my mom, and she already knew. I was crying, I was devastated. And it's just like, okay, one thing you don't do is, one, you don't fornicate, but now you are pregnant out of wedlock. And so then what is like, I have to cover myself, right? I have to cover myself. Like, I have to make this right. I was ashamed. And so while I was in this relationship, mind you, I didn't say this, but this relationship was a abusive relationship. It started off verbally abusive, and then at one point it became physical. So I was in this relationship, I was miserable, but I found out I was pregnant. So then at this point, I was determined to stay, because one thing I knew is like, I grew up in a 2-parent household. I knew the importance of having children grow up with both their parents. I grew up in a loving household. So I was determined, like, I am not going to raise my son by myself without his dad, despite the situation that I was in. So I was determined to stay in it. However, at one point, there was an incident that became very, very violent, and my parents literally came, packed up all my stuff, and said, "We're bringing you back home." So I came back home, 5 months pregnant, gave birth to my son, and that was the greatest blessing of my life. And God delivered me from that relationship. And I still didn't understand the root cause of my self-esteem issues. I kept thinking that what would solve it was, I just got to find the right guy. I got to find the right guy. And so what I continued to do was get in and out of relationships, giving myself to these guys and thinking, if I just give them what they want, if I do everything that they want of me, then they'll love me. So I became the yes person. They would say jump, I'd say how high. And that's what I would do. I became a doormat. And this went on for years, in and out of relationships. And I thought then, my validation would come from me being successful. And so I had to make up for, because when I got into that relationship and I got pregnant, I dropped out of school. So I was out of school for a while. I was just working so I could provide for my son, move back in with my parents. My parents were helping me raise him. So I'm working, and I was like, okay, I have to cover myself. I have to make up for all of this. I'm ashamed. So I went on, I finished college, got my degree, first one in my family to get a degree. So I was like, yes, this makes up for me, not doing things the right way. And so I started to try to overachieve. And so then I started putting my validation in my education. I was like, oh, I have these degrees, and got another degree. And so I started believing that, okay, now I'm better because now I'm successful. I have my education. So that makes me somebody. Not understanding that my identity was not rooted or grounded in any outward external entities, right? That it comes from within and it comes from our Father. But I didn't know that. And so I was still seeking validation from any source that I could find. And so now I'm educated. And so I'm taking care of my son. I got my education, but I still was this broken girl on the inside. So in and out of relationships, in and out of relationships. And I had told God, God, I'm not going to keep doing it this way. I'm going to surrender to you. But I hadn't dealt with the core issues. So I was celibate for a few years. And I told God, okay, I'm going to do it your way. And then another man came into my life. And I let everything go that I said that I was going to do for God, because I was still broken. And my focus really wasn't God. My focus was a man. So I had my son. My son by this time was 7 years old. And I met this other guy. He was saying all the right things. And I thought, oh, he's different. At least because other relationship I had been in, I was the man in relationship, paying for everything, using my car, the whole 9 yards. So the only thing that I was benefiting from the relationship I was in was just being able to say that I had somebody there, right? So this man was a little different because, okay, he paid for the dates and would pick me up, but he told me from the beginning, I'm not looking for a commitment. Now, by this time, I was celibate, and I had been celibate for some years. because I had a desire to be married, because I was like, God, I don't want this. I don't want to keep getting in and out of a relationship. I want to be committed. I want what your word promises, which is marriage. But I wasn't following God's plan for kingdom marriage, for how he ordains it. I was following and touching the devil's stuff. So I was celibate by this time. I had met this man. And so he was different to me, because it's like, oh, I don't have to pay for dates. And oh, he's picking me up. So I was like, okay, this is different. And I told him up front, I said, I'm celibate. I've been celibate for 4 years. And I said, I'm looking for marriage. And he was very honest. He's like, well, I'm not looking for a commitment, but I like you and I want to be with you. See, and okay, if a man says up front he doesn't want to commit, pay attention to that. But I didn't. See, in my head, well, I'm going to church, I'm following God, I'm celibate. So you know what? I can change him. I'll pray for him and we can get married. This was my naiveness. So now, mind you, I told him I was going to sleep with him. All right. All right. I didn't hold fast to what I said I was going to do, because I was still weak and I hadn't dealt with the issues that were at the core of my heart, the self-esteem issues, the low self-worth. I was broken. So I stayed with him, gave myself up to him, and we were together for 9.5 years. I gave him 9.5 years of my life. I got pregnant with my second child, my second son. And so now it's like, I did this again, God, after I said I wouldn't do this, after I said I was going to do things according to your will. And so I determined, it's like, I got to stay in this relationship. And mind you, like he said up front, I'm not looking for a commitment. He was not committed to me. He came and went as he pleased. He had other women, but he knew, you're there, I can pick you up when I want to. And I was good to him. I was good to him. He knew, she's the one at home waiting on me. She's faithful. She's loyal. And he's like, well, if you wait, I can decide when I want to marry you. And I remember him saying to me, you're a good woman. I don't know why I don't want to marry you. Okay. And so I stayed, and I stayed for a long time. And it finally got to a point to where I began to cry out to God, because I was so tired and I didn't know who I was. And I remember we were living together. I had just had my son. My son was 4 months old. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, I'm going to stay with this man. Because one, he was good to my oldest son. So I was like, okay, you try to pick and choose. Well, this is good. This is good. But really deep down, it's like, this is not what I want. I want real love. God, I want what your word promises. And I remember crying out to God, and God was very, very blunt with me. And he said this to me. He said, daughter, if you stay here and you die in this state, you will go to hell. And that was my wake-up call. So I packed up my things, and I took my oldest son and my baby, who was 4 months old, and I moved back in with my parents. And it was then at that time that I really decided I was going to pursue God, because I needed him, because I was so broken. And I remember crying out to him in my bedroom at my parents' house, saying, God, who am I? Who am I? I don't know who I am. Who am I? That was my cry. And it was then that God began to take me on a journey. And I literally surrendered to him from the core of my heart. I fully surrendered to him. And I told him, like, you know what? I'm going to do things your way. I want to be married. But aside from being married, I want to be whole. I want to be okay. I don't want to look like I'm okay on the outside, because on the outside, yes, I'm educated. And, by this point, I have become an author and written books. And so I had all these outward accolades and titles, but on the inside, I was messed up. And I said, God, I don't want to look like I have things together on the outside, but be messed up on the inside. But I want to be fully whole. And so God began to take me on a journey, and he began to tell me who I was and who he created me to be, that you are a daughter of Zion, and that your worth is far above rubies. And one thing God said to me, he said, you're going to be in a season. And he said, during this season, you cannot date. And one promise he gave to me, he said, daughter, you shall be married. He said, but When you get married, you will not date. You will go into marriage. He said, and I will do it. You will not have a hand in it. And everything that God told me to do, I had to do. So God said, you cannot date and you cannot fornicate. And so I began to walk that out. And I remember I went to Mardell's one day. It's a Christian bookstore. And I was feeling so discouraged this day. And it was shortly after I had moved out and left my youngest son's father. And I was just feeling so discouraged. I felt alone. And I remember I was walking past some books and some journals. And there was a particular journal, and the Lord spoke to me. He said, daughter, I want you to purchase this journal. This is the journal right here. And I obeyed. I said, okay, God. So I purchased this journal. This was in 2018. I had left my son's father in 2015. Okay. So I'm just wanting to give you guys the time frame. So 2018, I purchased this journal as the Lord commanded me to. And I got home and he said, daughter, this is going to be your marriage faith journey journal. And he said, as I speak to you, I want you to write down what I speak to you, and what I tell you to do, do it. And so I did. And I'm going to share with you the first entry. Okay. It says, prepare yourself. You will weep, but not tears of sorrow. What you have sown in tears, you will reap greatly in joy. This is your marriage journey journal. I will lead you and I will do it. It will be my doing. You will not have a hand in it. You will show up and it will be done. Write what I say, write what I tell you. It will be a testimony to others. As I told you before, you will be married within 6 months of meeting your husband. This was a word that the Lord spoke to me during one of my personal prayer times, that within less than 6 months of meeting my husband, we would be married. So I knew it would be an accelerated work. He said, it will be like your mother and father. My mom and dad have the same testimony. They've been married for 41 years, and they met each other in June. By December, they were married. So he was just letting me know it will be the same like your mom and dad. He said, you will be sought after as Jacob sought after Rachel. Your husband will pursue you. Rest in my word. Adorn yourself. Cover yourself in my word daily. Take the cloak of mourning off and replace it with the garment of praise. I propel you quickly to your destiny. There is purpose. So during this time, I literally began to just delve myself into God's word and to become closer to him. As the word says, draw nigh unto me and I'll draw nigh unto you. And I was waking up daily and praying and speaking God's word, and everything that he spoke to me, I wrote. So as he began to speak to me concerning marriage, one of the first words was that within less than 6 months of meeting your husband, you will be married. He said, you will not have a hand in it, but I will do it. So during one of my personal prayer times, God spoke to me and he said, I want you to get your passport. I didn't understand it. I'm like, get my passport. Now, mind you, I never had a thought of leaving the country. That's never something that entered my mind. So when I heard that word, it was like, okay. I wrote it down, but I didn't really think about it. And so literally it had left me. And so our family comes together and has prayer regularly. And so during one of our family prayer times, there was a prophet there. And as we were praying, the word of the Lord came forth, and the prophet came over to me. He said, the Lord said to get your passport before the end of this year. This was 2018. And so it's like, okay, God has spoken that to me before. And so there was like this urgency. So it's like, okay, I'm going to obey. So I did. I took my children. We went and got our passports. Now, mind you, I told you my dad's a pastor. So I'm thinking, God didn't give me any other details. So it was my assumption, since my dad's a pastor, well, maybe all of my family's supposed to get our passports, and we're going to go somewhere and do missions or do work somewhere. So I told my mom and dad, it's like, God told me to get my passports. I think you guys should too. I think we're going to go do missions somewhere. And my parents believed the word of the Lord. So we all went down together. We applied for our passports and we got our passports. So my mom, my dad, my brother, my sister. So we got our passports. So during another prayer time, personal prayer time, then God gave me some more details. And he told me, he said, you will go to Africa. And I'm like, okay, honestly, I never thought about going to Africa. Okay. So it's like, well, okay, Lord, I wrote it down in my journal. He said, you will go to Africa. Okay. Another time, came back. All right. And as I'm giving my testimony, I'm going to come back on here and I'm going to begin to share different pages in my journal because I'm wanting to help ignite somebody's faith. So during another personal prayer time, the Lord became more specific. And he said specifically to me, he said, daughter, you will go to Tanzania. So I began to research Tanzania. I began looking up, things about Tanzania. During the time I was looking it up, the president was, he's no longer with us. John, oh, his last name is not coming to me. Magufuli, okay? President Magufuli. So I really began researching Tanzania and heavily following Tanzania. So then I began to think, it's like, well, God, am I supposed to move there? Am I going there for missions? And so, and then, there was this great, like, massive move of our people going to Africa and moving there. So I started believing, like, okay, maybe I'm supposed to move there. And so God didn't give me any other details. He just said, okay, first he said, you will go to Africa. Then he specifically said, daughter, you will go to Tanzania. So I believed his word. I wrote it down and I didn't know how I would get there. I didn't know when I was going. So I just believed his word. And so during this time, I'm still praying, fasting, and believing God for marriage. Everything that he's telling me about my marriage, I'm writing down. Now, during this time, my children and I, by this time, had moved out of my parents' house. I had gotten my own place. So this is now 2019. And I was living in a townhouse, but I was praying for a home. I wanted to be a homeowner. So I'd worked on my credit and I began looking for houses and going to lenders, but I kept getting blocked. And I was starting to become really, really discouraged because it's like, God, I want a house for my children and I. And I remember the word of the Lord that he spoke to me. Okay, sorry, I'm going too far ahead. So 2019, moved into my own place. Okay, so I'm speeding up now. Now I'm in 2021. Okay, so 2021, I'm praying for a house. I've been living in my townhouse since 2019. So I'm praying to God. It's like, okay, I want a house. I was being blocked on every end for the house. And I remember the word that the Lord spoke to me. He said, daughter, because I was being blocked, he said, stop looking for houses. Your husband just bought a home. Your husband is here in the city. Because I remember asking God, is my husband even here? Is he out of state? And he said, your husband is here. He just bought a house. Stop looking for houses. I wrote that down. Now, one thing I do want to share with you. While I was praying and believing God for a husband, one thing specifically I asked God, I said, God, I want the man that you have for me to know that it's me, to know that I'm his wife. Because I was always the one pursuing a man and validating a man and trying to prove to him who I was. I said, I want him to know that it's me and I want him to see me and I want him to say the words, I see you. I asked God that specifically. I asked him, I said, I want him to say, I see you. Okay, this is what I asked God. I'm trying to give you guys all this context, okay? So I asked God that specifically. I want him to know that it's me. Now there's a letter. I wrote God a letter, and I'm going to turn to the pages really quickly. Bear with me here, because this notebook is full, because God literally is in the details, and God speaks when you're willing to listen. Okay, so in 2020, I wrote God a letter. It's dated, I don't know if you guys can see it, August 28th, 2020. I wrote God a letter. Okay. It says, Dear Father Yah, that's what I call my father, because it's his name. I am writing this letter to you. I believe that you will do exceedingly abundantly above all that I am asking or thinking, according to the power that works in me. I want a husband, and because I believe you for that promise, there are some things and qualities that I am asking specifically for that he possess. Father, I want a man who has the spirit of David. He must be a worshiper in spirit and in truth, and have his own relationship with you. I want a man who is awakened to the truth of his identity in you and will lead me and our family. I want a man who will value me and honor me and love me sincerely as Christ loves the church. I want him to spend time with me. I want him to possess your heart and have the heart of a father and love my children as his own. He must be honest, of a sound mind, and walk in integrity. I would like a man who already has his own career and is goal-oriented. He must have a vision for himself and his family so that we know where we are going. I would also like him to be taller than me and someone that I am attracted to. I want him, if possible, to come from a two-parent godly home. I want in-laws. I would like for him to be from another country so we could travel there, preferably somewhere in Africa. Father, I want someone who is older than me, but not more than 10 years. I want a man who has his own car and someone who is consistent and does what he says he will do. Above all, Father, I want him to have a relationship with you, a solid one, because if he does, I can trust him, and I will follow and obey him with your help. I trust you to fill in the gaps and do exceedingly abundantly more than I ask or think. Father, also, I ask that he be financially stable and good at saving and budgeting. Let him be balanced in that area. Let him cover me and my children without shame, and let him be the breadwinner. Father, I would also like a man who will give me the option to be home with our children. Someone with nice hands, good hygiene, nice teeth, and nice eyes. You know I like eyes, laugh out loud. He must be someone who loves family and will not mind spending time with my family. That's all, Father. I thank you. So that is the letter that I wrote to God, okay? Specifically asking him for, the qualities that I desired in a man. So I'm giving you guys all this context, okay? So God is speaking all these things to me. Now, this is what I asked God specifically. So God was giving me all these words and telling me, what he had prepared for my marriage. He said, daughter, you will be happy in marriage. He told me that. He said, you will be happily married. But he kept telling me, he said, it will be a quick work. It will be a quick work. Within less than 6 months of meeting your husband, you will be married. You will not have a hand in it. It will be a quick work. You will just show up and it will be done. And so I believed God's word. Now, mind you, I had to fight the good fight of faith because according to societal standards, someone like me was highly unlikely to be married, let alone be married to what they call a high value man. Maybe I could get a Pookie, but someone like me was not worthy of love. I remember I had crying out to God, and God had to tell me, you can't be on the TV, you can't be on social media. Because as I was fighting the good fight of faith, I could only feed myself with the word. So I couldn't listen to the TV or listen to social media that was telling women who look like me. So I'm speaking to you, daughters of Zion. I'm speaking to those of you, my sisters who look like me. And this is for anybody, but right now specifically, there's something I have to address because there's a spirit of Satan that has been cast out over our people that has been telling the daughters of Zion that as a Black woman, you are not a desirable or viable partner for marriage, that if you are over the age of 30, that you are leftovers, and if you are a single mom, that nobody will want you with children. I had to fight off those words. I had to fight that off because in my old relationship with my son's father, I was constantly trying to prove to him that I wasn't those things because he was saying to me, if you'd be better as a Black woman, maybe I'd marry you. And he listened to voices like Kevin Samuels, and nothing against Kevin Samuels, don't know him, but certain voices that were ungodly voices. And I had to fight those things off with the word of God. I had to remind myself that I am the apple of God's eyes. My worth is far above rubies, that I am made in the image of my Father, so I am beautiful. And so I fought with the word. Despite how I felt, despite what I heard, I fought with the word of God. So God was speaking to me about marriage. And at times, yes, I was discouraged because by 2021, I had been single, since 2015. So I have been single and celibate. Okay. I remained celibate for over 6 years. And so I would get discouraged at times because it's like, is it going to happen? You know, I was 37 years old and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm getting close to 40. Now, I do have to say this. I was single. I had left my son's father. I had not slept with him and I hadn't even kissed him, but he still had a place in my life. We would still go on dates together. We would take our kids out to do things together. So he had that place in my heart. He still was coming over to my place whenever he wanted to. I allowed that. He would sit, hang out. And so I still kind of had this lingering hope that we would be together, praying for him, fasting. But deep down, God, I kept hearing his voice say, let him go. He's not for you. Let him go. He's not for you. Now, mind you, my youngest son's father's from Nigeria. So I also thought that, possibly the Africa connection was with him. But I know I kept hearing God's voice say, he's not for you. Let him go. But I was trying to pray him through. And so I remember finally when God said to me, he said, if you keep trying to push your will, I'll let you have it, but you'll suffer for it. And he finally told me, he said, daughter, you have to let this go. And I'm like, well, God, I did. I'm not sleeping with him. I haven't kissed him like in all these years. And God said, no, you have to let him go in your heart. He said, stop letting him come over and sit at your house. He said, when he comes to get his kids, let him stay in the driveway. You take the kids out to him. Stop going out on dates with him. Cut it off. And that was hard for me. I remember saying to God, okay, I don't know how to let go of this man, but if you will help me, I will let him go. And I cried that whole night. But I remember I didn't even have the guts enough to call and say it to him or say it to his face. So I sent it to him in a text message. And I told him, I said, I have a new relationship in my life. I said, and due to my new relationship, I am no longer able to do these things, and I listed them. Okay, that's my baby. I told you guys I have twins. So let me give her binky. Okay. And then I'm going to continue my testimony here. Okay. Shh. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. My little one. So I cried that whole night. But literally, when I woke up the next morning, it was like God took that from me. So I know this is getting long. I'm trying to wrap this up, guys. Trying to wrap this up. So it was shortly after that. So literally, I told him I had a new relationship. And the relationship I was meaning was the relationship I had with God, because my relationship with God was new. I wasn't the same woman I was anymore. I had confidence. I mean, I literally was a different woman. I was confident. That low self-esteem was gone. I knew who I was in Christ. And I began walking in faith and doing the things that God told me to do. So during this time now, God began to speak to me about family. And he started telling me, I'm restoring families, daughter. He said, I've heard my cries of my daughters. I've heard the cries of the daughters of Zion. He said, and I'm restoring the breach. And he told me to put on a family conference. Okay. So before I talk about the family conference he told me to put on. So now we're in 2021. I told you that God told me that I would be married within less than 6 months of meeting my husband. He told me to stop stop looking for houses. This is 2021 because my husband had just bought a house. He, mind you, didn't know a man, but this is what I'm hearing in the spirit. And this is what I wrote down. He told me to get my passport, told me I was going to Africa, then told me specifically I was going to Tanzania. And then remember the letter that I went over with you guys, what I asked God. Okay. And one thing God told me, he said, the man that I have for you, he's after my heart. He will be loyal and faithful to you as I am, because he's a man after my heart. And I said, okay, God. So now we're in 2021. I had completely let go of my youngest son's father, as God told me to. So in June of 2021, my brother is a minister. My brother was putting on a conference. And so my brother puts on conferences with a worship group, a worship team that I'm also part of. And so quarterly, they put on conferences. Now, there was always a praise and worship group that did the praise and worship for the conferences for years. But this particular year, they had a different praise and worship group. And so I remember asking my brother as the conference was coming up in June, and hey, Daniel, that's my brother's name. Who's doing the praise and worship? It's such and such. He was like, no, I got a new group. They're really anointed. They're called Unchained Worship. They're doing the praise and worship this year for the conference. I was like, oh, okay. He was like, yeah. He was like, and maybe you should think about joining them. And I sing. I've sing since what, child? God has blessed me with a beautiful voice. So that's what he said. And I said, oh, I'm not really thinking about joining any groups anymore. So anyways, the day of the conference came. And so I remember the conference was being held at the Marriott Hotel, one of the Marriott hotels here where I live in Kansas. And so I went, and I remember walking in the door. But leading up to the door, I could hear the praise and worship, and it was anointed. And it's like, okay, praise God. I couldn't wait to get inside to the conference. And I remember opening the door. When I walked in, I could see to my left, this worship team, Unchained Worship, worshiping and praising God. And there was a guy on the guitar, and I looked over, he had a hat on, and I remember hearing in my spirit, that's your husband. Now, mind you, I began to fight that off because by this time I was confident. I wasn't focused so much on marriage because, I believed God's word. And so I thought that was my flesh. And so I was rebuking, like, God, I came here to worship you. I'm not in that frame of mind. Satan, I rebuke you. I'm not looking for a man. That's where I was, not recognizing that it was God. So the first time I saw my husband was in June of 2021. So that's what I heard in my spirit. So went to the conference, enjoyed the conference. The conference was awesome. So that was June 2021. And then the Lord began to speak to me about putting on a family conference. He's like, daughter, I want you to put on a family conference because I'm restoring families in the earth and I'm bringing families together. Now, he did start dealing with me about the Black family, how the enemy has come in and tried to destroy the Black family. So he said, daughter, I'm bringing my families together. So he said, I want you to put on a family conference and I want you to call it the Bring Back the Family Conference. Now I'm like, God, you want me to put on a conference and my family is broken. I'm believing you to put my family together. I'm not even married. I don't have a husband. This is what I'm saying to God. But it's like, I'm going to obey you. So I had set the conference for August because this was the time frame that God told me to do it. August. So June was the first time I saw my husband. Now, my brother kept saying to me, sis, why don't you think about joining Unchained Worship, joining this worship group? And I'm like, no, I don't want to join a worship group. But I was like, I'm not thinking about joining groups. I used to sing in groups, but I was done with the group thing, And so I told him, I said, I don't want to join a worship team. But he kept pushing it. So, but little did I know, God had spoke to my brother. My brother knew my husband before I did. He had spoke to my brother and told my brother that my husband was my husband, but he wasn't released to tell me. So my brother kept pushing. He's like, why don't you join the worship group? And I'm like, I don't want to join that worship group. I don't know them. I'm not thinking about joining a worship group. And he said this to me. What perked at my ears was this. He said, well, the leader of the worship team of Unchained Worship, he's like, his name is David, and he's from Tanzania, and they're going over to Tanzania in July to do a crusade. And he said, remember, you said God said you were going to Tanzania. My ears perked up. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, God, maybe this is the way you're getting me to Tanzania. If I join this guy's worship team, then I can go with them to Tanzania, and maybe you'll reveal to me why I'm supposed to be over there. This is what I'm thinking. So then I was interested in joining the group, not because I knew anything about this man, but because of God's word that he had spoke to me in my prayer time that I was going to Tanzania. I had no idea how. So I was like, oh, that's the connection. That's what I'm thinking. So I was like, oh, I said, really? I was like, yeah. I was like, you're right. I said, maybe this is the way for us to go to Tanzania. So I was like, okay, well, where do they rehearse? And he was like, well, they rehearse at Brother David, they call him Brother David's house. He's like, I'll give you the address and you could go. So my brother gave me the address to this gentleman, David's house. And so I went on the day. Well, first he had one of the members call me. That's a mutual friend of ours. And she's like, I heard that you wanted to join Unchained. Your brother told me that. Now, mind you, I was thinking, I don't want to join the group. I don't. Excuse me, hiccups. But I was like, I played it off because I'm in the back of my head. It's like, I want to go to Tanzania because God said I was going to Tanzania. And if y'all going to Tanzania and I need to join you guys to go, then that's what I'm going to do. So I was like, I'm thinking about joining. Excuse me. Hiccups. I need to get water. Excuse me. All right, Father. So, sorry, I'm grabbing my water here. This testimony will come forth. I don't care what interferences. So I went to the house and I remember, for one, I got lost. And so I almost didn't get here. And I got frustrated because I got lost because this house was far. I don't remember calling my brother like, I'm not going to this rehearsal. I'm lost. I don't know where. He's like, sis, you need to turn here, go back, go. He was like, just go and check it out. He was being obedient, right, to what God was telling him to do. So I found the house. And so I got here and he let me in the house. And I remember coming and observing, the rest of the worship team was downstairs in the basement. And so I was just observing, but I found myself drawn to David, who's the leader of Unchained Worship, the worship team. And just, it was something very different about him, his demeanor, how he conducted himself, how he spoke, how he spoke to the rest of the team members. There was just this genuine kindness. And I found myself in that moment, like, attracted to him. And it, to the point to where it was upsetting me because I didn't understand why. It's like, I don't know this man. Why am I attracted to him? And I was rebuking it because it's like, God, this is not where I'm at anymore, But I found myself very attracted to him. And so it's just like I was frustrated in that moment because it's like, I remember sitting there thinking to myself, oh, I like him. And so enjoyed the worship, enjoyed the rehearsal. And so I did tell him, I was like, oh yeah, I'll join, So I joined. And so then I got a list of dates for like the upcoming engagements. So that was, by this time, it was the end of July. Yeah, the end of July. So my conference was coming up in August. So mind you, I played the piano and my brother plays piano. And so for my conference, my brother was going to play and do the praise and worship for my conference. Well, my brother had decided that he was moving to North Carolina, but he wasn't supposed to move until October of 2021. So he was supposed to have been at my conference. But then God accelerated some things in his life. And he called me. He was like, sis, I'm not going to be able to be at the conference and play. I'm going to be gone to North Carolina by then. He got in a job. They wanted him there sooner. So I was like, man, well, who's going to do praise and worship? And I remember him being funny. He's like, well, you could play. It's like, I can't play and then also, conduct and host. And so he was like, oh, well, remember, Brother Dave? He's like, why don't you, Unchained? You just join, ask David about having Unchained do praise and worship for the conference. And so I'm like, okay. He was like, yeah. He was like, just give him a call. So I did. I called him. My brother gave me his number. He didn't answer at first, but I left him a message. I'm like, hey, Brother David, this is Charity. I'm doing this conference. Are you guys able? So he ended up calling me back a few days later. I was like, yeah, sure. And I remember being excited because it's like, oh, I'll get to see him when he comes. So mind you, now we're in August of 2021. So did the family conference. It came and set up equipment. And still, I'm like, just so drawn to him. And I didn't know why. And in my head, I'm thinking he probably has a girlfriend. But I really liked him. And I didn't understand, where this feeling was coming from, but I was very drawn to him. And he just had a very calm, sweet demeanor about him. And so they did the praise and worship. We had an awesome conference. And that was that. So then we had an upcoming engagement, Unchained Worship, our worship team. The worship team had a upcoming revival, and it was a 2-day revival. And I remember being excited because it's like, okay, I'm going to get to see him. So I got there, and I was one of the first team members there. Now he was there, but with, the guys setting up equipment and stuff. But I was like one of the first girl team members. Okay. So I remember like really feeling nervous because it's like, one, I already knew I was liking him at this point. And so then I, it's like, man, where's the rest of the other team members, my other girls, so I can, just feel a little bit more comfortable. You guys know how it is. So I remember, going into the tent and sitting down on the chair and just trying to really be invisible. And they were setting up the equipment, and he came over to me. He's like, hey, how you doing? Shook my hand. I'm like, oh, I'm good, and trying my hardest not to look at him. So he's setting up the equipment. And then I remember he looked at me and he said, hey, can you come help out? He's like, we're about to do a mic check. He was like, get up here and start singing something. Now, mind you, I had, sang with the group like all together, but not by myself. And now, don't get me wrong, I can sing, but I was nervous and I was already by myself. I didn't want to sing by myself in front of him. So I was like, no, I'm not going to get up there and sing. No. He was like, no, just come up here. He's like, we're doing the mic check. It's okay. He was like, just sing something. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. He's like, just come on up here. So I'm like, okay. So I go up there and I started singing. And so, it's my son coming in. So I started singing. Sweetheart, it's bedtime. Okay. And so I'm up there singing, and I didn't know that in that moment God was dealing with him. So we had an awesome revival that particular evening. I was singing. I don't even remember what I was singing. So the next day I was looking forward to, I'll get to see him again, right? So came back the next day for the second day, but he was not there. So I played it off. I was like, hey guys, where is Brother David? They're like, oh, yeah, he wasn't able to be here. He's at work. I said, okay. So the second night, there was this guest evangelist there, somebody I didn't know. And I remember she began to pray, and my spirit was, really turned off, because some of the words that she began to say were they were not in the spirit. It was really demonic. And I remember looking up as she was praying, and I stopped praying because it's like, that's not of God. And so I remember I looked at the team members. It's like, I said, you know what? I said, I can't stay. This is not of God. I'm leaving. And so I did. And they thought, oh, you're upset. I wasn't upset. I just knew, that's not of God. And so I'm going to go ahead and go. And so I don't know if they assumed that I was leaving the group or what, but I left. And so I know one of the team members must have called him, because I got home and he called me. And he just asked, he's like, hey, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. So then I knew it's like, somebody told you that I left. And so, we didn't really talk much about that at all. And we just talked. And so we started talking. And mind you, so this is August 21. So we just talked. And we talked about everything. Talked about God. But he was just so easy to talk to. And so then it's like, oh my God, I like him. But I'm still thinking he doesn't like me. He probably has a girlfriend. And so I'm not thinking anything of it, It's like, oh, he probably doesn't even like me. But I really liked him after this conversation. We talked for a long time. So that was that. And then maybe a week, 2 weeks after that, he texted me. And so I have a nonprofit organization, and he was like, hey, he's like, I just wanted to know if you'd be willing to sit down and talk some business. He was like, I'm trying to get 501c3 status. He's like, I know that you have it. Would you be willing to sit down, maybe over a cup of coffee? And he did tell me, he was like, I'm working out of town right now. He's like, but I come back in town on Fridays. So if you'd be free on one of the Fridays, could we sit down and talk business? So I didn't get excited because I'm thinking, he just wants to talk business for real. It's like, sure. I was like, I'll be willing to help you, with whatever you need help with. So, yeah. So that was that. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll help you. And then I tried to egg things on a little bit because in our conversation from when he had called me, he talked to me about like tanzanite in Tanzania. And so I looked up a picture of tanzanite and I texted to him a few days. I'm like, oh, is this what you were talking about? That looks really, really cool and really pretty. And he just texts back. He's like, yes, ma'am. I'm like, wow, I got put in the ma'am category. Okay, he really doesn't like me. So anyways, I was looking forward to sitting down and talk business with him, not knowing, that God was orchestrating this. So he ended up texting me one day and he was like, hey, why don't we do coffee? I'm going to be in town on Friday. He was like, so why don't we get coffee this Friday? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Friday works for me. Let's, at this time. He's like, what time work for you? I was like, this time. He's like, cool. He's like, we'll do coffee. So I'm thinking it's coffee to talk business. Not excited. Well, what ended up happening is his flight got canceled. So he called me and he was so apologetic. He's like, I'm so sorry. Like, to the point where it's like, no, it's really okay. He's like, no, I'm really. And he called me at like 7 that evening and we talked until like 7, 8 the next morning. And then I knew it was like, okay, this is different. I've never done that with anybody, just talking. And we talked again about everything. And he was just so easy to talk to. And it was so refreshing. I'm like, what is going on here? So we talked literally until the next day. And so then it was like, man, I really like this guy. And I remember telling my sister, man, I like him. And so after that conversation, he was like, we'll reschedule. And I was like, yeah, we can reschedule. And I remember I laughed until I was like, I don't drink coffee anyway. He laughed. He's like, I don't either. He's like, I drink tea. I just thought, he's like, well, we'll have to get together for dinner. And then I knew. I was like, okay, I think he likes me. And I was like, yeah, I don't do coffee. So anyways, then a few days after that, he called me and he said, look, he said, I'm just going to be direct with you. He said, I like you. He said, and I want to be with you. Now, mind you, I hadn't dated him. We hadn't gone on any dates. We talked on the phone. And so this is what he's saying to me. He said, I like you. He said, I know I want to be with you. He said, where I come from, he said, I'm direct. He said, I know what I want. He said, so I want you to be my girlfriend. He said, would you be my girlfriend? And I told him, I said, the feeling is mutual. It's like, I like you too. And I told him, I said, yes, I'll be your girlfriend. Now, mind you, I saw him in June of 2021. He, joined the praise and worship team. The praise and worship team came and did the praise and worship for my family conference in August. Okay. By this time, this is September now of 2021. September. Okay. In September the 24th actually is when he asked me to be his girlfriend. September 24th of 2021. We hadn't gone on a date. Okay. So I told him yes. And he said these words to me. He said, remember when I asked you to come do the mic check and come up there and sing on the mics? I said, yeah. He said, I saw you. Mind you, remember I asked God, I said, I want the man who knows that I'm his wife to say that he sees me. He said, I saw you. He said, I see you. He said, and I want you. Literally, I was like literally jumping for joy on the inside. He didn't know that, but I was jumping for joy on the inside because it's like, I asked God. Now, mind you, in the moment, I didn't refer back to what I asked God. Okay. It wasn't until later after we got married that the Lord began to go back and show me. Okay. So that's what he said to me when he asked me to be his girlfriend. So I said yes. All right. Now, my husband is a travel nurse. And so, mind you, this is 2021, the stuff with COVID. So he was working out of town 6 days a week. So he flew, we planned to go out to dinner, but he wasn't going to have an off day for a while. So we're at the end of September, right? So we planned to go to dinner. I think it was a week after that. Yeah, it was a week after. So the 24th of September, he asked me to be his girlfriend. And then we planned to officially go to dinner, our first date. So he was going to fly in that Friday. So I'm trying to wrap this up. This video is over an hour, but this is my testimony. So he flew in Friday. So now this is October. We're in October now. He flew in, picked me up. I dropped my boys off with my sister. He flew in from Texas where he was working, came and picked me up, took me to this restaurant I'd never been to, gorgeous, lovely restaurant. And we had an amazing, amazing date. And we just talked, and it was so refreshing. And I remember it's like I didn't want the date to be over. And so then we, leave the restaurant. And so we went and sat out in his car in the parking lot. We were still just talking. And he looked at me. He said, look, he said, I know that it's you. He said, let's get married. And I'm like, what? Why did you? This is our first date. Okay. This is October of 2021 now. Okay. He said, I know that it's you. He's like, I want you. He was like, let's get married. And I said, are you serious? He said, yeah. He said, I know what I want. So I said, okay. And he was like, well, let's set a date. Now, mind you, I told you before, the worship team goes to Tanzania and do crusades. So the team was scheduled to do a crusade in June of 2022. And I had made plans now to go to Tanzania because I was thinking, I'm going to Tanzania like God told me. So I had signed up to go with them thinking I'm going to go do missions, right? So I said, well, we're already planning to go to Tanzania in June. I was like, why don't we just get married over there? Because I had always wanted a beach wedding. And I knew it was like, there's beaches in Tanzania. And he and I talked about that. He was like, I've always dreamed of a beach wedding. So when he said that, I was like, me too. I was like, well, why don't we just do it in Tanzania in June? So we looked at the calendar. He's pulling up the calendar on his phone. I'm pulling up the calendar on my phone. And I was like, okay, let's do it. I believe I said June the 4th at the time. I was like, we'll be over there. He's like, okay, June the 4th. Now, remember what the word of the Lord was that he spoke to me. Within less than 6 months of meeting your husband, you would be married. So June 4th, we're in October of 2021. June 4th of 2022 would have been well over what God said. Okay. But I told him, I said, let's do it June the 4th because we'll already be in Tanzania. We could have a beach wedding. So we planned that. Okay. So he drives me home. I'm on cloud 9 because I'm thinking now of all the words that God had spoken. And so I know it's like, I know this is God. So I remember he took me home. Then I got in my car, went and picked up my kids from my sister. And I told her, I said, I'm getting married. And as I began to share with her, she was like, do you remember what God spoke? And I said, yeah. So I went home, getting ready for bed. And David called me. And he said, babe, he said, June is too far. He was like, I can't wait that long. He's like, I want to marry you now. He was like, we got to get married sooner than that. Now, I'm a teacher. I teach 4th grade. So he was like, when is the next time do you have a break from school? Because he was like, we got to get married now. I was like, okay. He was like, get your calendar. He's like, when can we do it? And I'm like, I don't know. Because, I'm thinking to myself, I'm at work, trying to plan a wedding. So he's like, when's the next time you have a break from school? I said, well, not until Christmas break. And he was like, well, how long is it? I was like, well, we get 2 weeks. I said, but that's going to be in December. And he was like, well, when is your last working day before break starts? And so I looked at the calendar. I said, December the 17th, that's a Friday. And he said, okay. He's like, the 18th is a Saturday. Let's get married the 18th. And I was like, are you serious? Now, mind you, this is the beginning of October 2021. He's like, yep, let's do it December 18th. He was like, does that work for you? I said, yeah, let's do it. I didn't think about how it was going to come together. I knew it was the Lord. So got off the phone and I'm like, oh my God, okay, we have to plan for this wedding. So this is October, early October. Okay. October the 26th. Okay. Now, one thing I had always wanted was to be proposed to in front of my family. That was always a dream of mine. So we knew that we were getting married, but he didn't officially propose to me and I didn't know when that was coming. So October the 26th, he officially proposed to me. He had gathered my family and took me to this beautiful, nice park, had a photographer set up, and then officially proposed to me. And I got my beautiful ring and it was official. I got engaged October the 26th of 2021. Okay. And then my husband, being the man that he is, now mind you, I want to go back to my letter. Okay. Then our parents came together. They sat down together, my mom and dad with his mom and dad, his parents. So he came from a 2-parent home. I asked for a 2-parent godly home. His parents are bishops in Tanzania and they have planted several churches. Okay. So, but they're here in the United States. So they came together and spoke with each other and asked for the blessing. And, you know, because we come from different cultures. My husband's from Tanzania. So sat down together and went over everything. They cooked for my family and gave gifts, and it was just beautiful. So went through all of that. And one thing my husband said to me, because I'm like, okay, we had planned this wedding. Now, mind you, I was used to doing everything, you know. And he said this to me. He said, don't take this from me. He said, in my culture, the man takes care of the wedding. He said, I know here in America, the father of the bride does. He said, but don't take that from me. He said, whatever you want, I want you to have a beautiful wedding. You just tell me. My husband covered everything. I didn't have anything to worry about. So where the Lord said, you will not have a hand in it, you'll just show up. That's literally what I did. We had a gorgeous, huge wedding and I showed up. Anything that I asked for, my husband took care of. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that because God is faithful and he blessed me with a wonderful man. And so everything was taken care of. Everything that I wanted, if I asked him, he made it happen. And I thank God for that. So we got married December the 18th of 2021 in a beautiful wedding. And when I say God brought his word to pass, he brought his word to pass. I asked that he come from a 2-parent godly home. That happened. I have in-laws. Not only that, remember I said I wanted a worshiper as David. My husband's name is David, and he literally is a worshiper. And I said, God has a sense of humor because he brought me a worshiper named David. We worship together. I said I wanted a man who had his own career. My husband is a nurse, and has been for many, many years. And when God told me to stop looking for houses, it was because my husband had literally just bought a house at the beginning of 2021. And so the house where I came to for rehearsals, I'm sitting in now, a house that's big enough for our wonderful blended family. And so, again, God is in the details. And so God had told me to stop looking for houses because he knew you would have a house with your husband. So God is in the details. He's in the details. When he said that I would be married within less than 6 months of meeting my husband, I was married within less than 6 months of meeting my husband, which is why we couldn't have gotten married in June of 2022, because God is not a man that he would lie. He brought his word to pass. I first saw him in June. We officially became girlfriend and boyfriend in September. By October, we were engaged, and in December, we were married. So really, if I count from September to December, because September is really when we officially got together, that was 3 months. So God said within less than 6 months of being married, you would be, within meeting, you would be married. And he brought that word to pass. Um, when I say, I asked for a visionary, my husband is a visionary. Now, we still travel to Tanzania. And I said I wanted a beach wedding. That was a dream of mine. So we had a second wedding ceremony on the beach in Tanzania. God brought his words to pass, and he even gave me the desire of my heart, what I wanted. We had a second wedding in Tanzania on the beach. And again, I'm happy. And God said that. Now, that doesn't mean that my husband and I don't have disagreements, because we do, because that's just the process of becoming one. But when I say God showed me how much he loved me through bringing his word to pass in my life, he showed me how much he loved me because he gave me the best for me. And I'm grateful that he didn't allow me to get what it is that I thought I wanted. So I want to encourage you. And I was married at 37, so let me say that. I was 37 years old when I got married. I was a single mom when I got married. And obviously, looking at me, I'm African American. So even all those lies of the enemy saying that African American women are not viable partners, or you're a leftover if you're past a certain age, or nobody will want you with a single mom, is a lie. So if you're sitting here wondering, okay, would God do it for me? He will, but he wants you to trust him. And that does mean that you have to do it according to his will and his way. There are some things you will have to cut off. There are some things you will have to walk away from. Yes, and you might have to wait for a period of time and go through a period of purification. I did, but it's well worth the wait. I am a living testimony that God is faithful to his word, and he wants you to know that he is faithful to his word, that you could trust him, that you can trust him, because he literally is who he says that he is. So God fulfilled his word when he told me you would go to Tanzania. I went to Tanzania, my entire family. And that was another word he had spoke. You and your family would travel together across the seas. We did. We have a beautiful blended family. My husband came in with 3 beautiful daughters. So I got bonus daughters, and I had my 2 sons. So we had a beautiful blended family of 7, and all 7 of us traveled to Tanzania together in June of 2022. We had an awesome time. I worshiped with my husband. Our worship team went Unchained along with my brother's worship team, Team Ascension, and we fulfilled the word of the Lord, and we did God's assignment there, and there's still an assignment that he has us doing now. So where he said that there was purpose for my marriage, God established my kingdom marriage for purpose, because marriage has a purpose in the earth. It's not just for you. Okay. So now we are a blended family of 9, because like I said, 5 months into being married, literally a week before we flew out to Tanzania, I found out that we were expecting, and we went and they told us it was twins. So when I went to Tanzania, I went pregnant. And like I said, I delivered our beautiful twin girls in January. So God has just been awesome and faithful to his word. And that's another testimony for another day of what he spoke to me concerning our children. So I just want you to be encouraged. I hope that my testimony has just helped ignite your faith. God indeed is a faithful God. He loves you. He wants the best for you. And so in order to receive God's best, you have to be willing to trust him against all the odds. So that's my testimony. And until the next video, I just pray that you all will be blessed, and I will see you all on the other side of victory.